This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. Turkey has announced the death toll in last month's massive earthquake has risen to nearly 48,000. AP correspondent Karen Chamas.
The head of Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Agency said the people who died included over 6,000 foreigners, with Syrian nationals accounting for the largest share. The February 6th quake affected 11 Turkish provinces and parts of neighbouring Syria. The United Nations has estimated Syria's death toll at 6,000. At least 230,000 buildings were destroyed or badly damaged in Turkey. Experts have pointed at lax building code enforcement as a major reason why the earthquake was so deadly. I'm Karen Chamas.
The head of Ukraine's defense intelligence, Krylo Budanov, told VOA that Russia is trying to buy anything, anywhere, including from Southeast Asian countries like Myanmar, to get weapons for its invasion of Ukraine. In a recent interview with VOA, the top Ukrainian intelligence official said there are certain efforts to buy through third countries large-scale withdrawal of weapons. A spokesperson for the Myanmar junta, Major General Zaw Min Tun, told VOA Burmese by phone this week that the accusation is impossible and illogical. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis made his first trip to the early nominating state of Iowa on Friday as he tests the waters for a 2024 presidential bid. He brought his message to a crowd at a casino in Davenport, just days before fellow Republican Donald Trump is slated to arrive. In remarks, DeSantis boasted about his policy record in Florida that includes signing a law in November of 2021 banning schools and businesses from requiring vaccination against COVID-19. Former President Donald Trump will travel to Davenport on Monday to outline his education plan. From Washington, you're listening to VOA News. 3 former members of a Hong Kong group that used to organize annual vigils in remembrance of the victims of China's 1989 crackdown in Tiananmen Square were jailed on Saturday for 4.5 months for failing to hand over information on the group. In accordance with Hong Kong's national security law, the offense carries a maximum sentence of 6 months. Since Peru's first protest death in mid-December, following the dramatic December 7th ouster of leftist President Pedro Castillo, prosecutors have opened at least 11 investigations into the deaths of some of the people killed during clashes with security forces. Family members of the victims have joined together, getting legal support and forming an association to spur authorities to action. Reuters' Freddie Joyner has more.
As Peru grapples to restore stability following months of anti-government protests that left 49 people dead, families that lost loved ones to the violence, which erupted following the dramatic December 7th ouster of leftist President Pedro Castillo, say they cannot forgive and forget. Now they are out to seek justice. In the southern city of Juliaca, a Santa Umpiri held the torn red and black sweatshirt of a 15-year-old son, who was shot in the back of the head on January 9th, the deadliest day of violence Peru has seen in over 20 years.
That's Reuters' Freddie Joyner reporting. Thousands of Israelis joined demonstrations on Saturday for the 10th consecutive week against controversial judicial reform plans by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's new right-wing government. The government says the reforms are designed to end overreach into politics by an unrepresentative Supreme Court. Critics say Netanyahu seeks legal changes that will hurt Israel's democratic checks and balances, foster corruption, and bring diplomatic isolation. Protesters say the changes will threaten democratic checks and balances by the courts and accuse Netanyahu of trying to escape a legal case against him. He's on trial for corruption. He denies the charges. Movies featuring strong women are in abundance this year. Among this year's Oscar nominees, VOA's Laurel Bowman has more.
Actress Michelle Yeoh battles her way through a multiverse. Actress Angela Bassett leads a grieving nation at war, and actress Cate Blanchett deviously manipulates members of a world-class orchestra. Stories led by female actors fill the list of movies vying for Academy Awards on Sunday, reflecting gains in an industry that has long relegated women to secondary roles. Laurel Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
It's been 3 years since the COVID-19 pandemic began, and nearly 200 prominent world figures on Saturday called for the vaccine inequity seen during the crisis to be relegated to history. Marissa Melton, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton.
Менш ніж за один тиждень, за час із 6 березня і лише на
It's
одному...
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying in less than a week, starting from March 6th, we managed to kill more than 1,100 enemy soldiers in the Bakhmut sector alone. In his nightly address to the nation, he said those deaths are an irreversible loss for Russia. Zelensky added that at least 1,500 more soldiers were wounded too seriously to go back to the battlefield. He said dozens of pieces of enemy equipment were destroyed, as were more than 10 Russian ammunition depots. The report was not independently verified. President Biden's expected to announce sweeping protections for more than 16 million acres of land and water in Alaska on Monday as he prepares to approve a massive oil drilling project that has drawn intense criticism from climate activists. The president's expected to declare the entire Arctic Ocean off limits to oil and gas leasing and development. The news comes from an administration official who spoke to AP on condition of anonymity ahead of the announcement. The Interior Department will also announce that it will write new regulations protecting nearly 13 million acres in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. It's the nation's largest land area that provide habitat for thousands of caribou and shorebirds. The U.S. government took extraordinary steps Sunday to stop a potential banking crisis after the historic failure of Silicon Valley Bank, assuring depositors at the failed financial institution that they will be able to access all of their money quickly. The announcement came amid fears that the factors that caused the Santa Clara, California-based bank to fail could spread. It also came only hours before trading began Monday morning in Asia. VOA News. Former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence offered his most forceful rebuke to date of his one-time boss Donald Trump, saying that history will hold him accountable for his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol building. Reuters' Freddie Joyner has more.
Former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence offered his most forceful rebuke to date of his one-time boss, Donald Trump, saying that history will hold him accountable for his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. On Saturday night, Pence told assembled journalists and their guests at the Gridiron Dinner, an annual white tie event in Washington, D.C., that President Trump was wrong, adding, quote, "I had no right to overturn the election, and his reckless words endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol that day." Pence was in the Capitol when thousands of Trump supporters breached the building in an attempt to stop Congress from certifying the results of the 2020 presidential election, which Trump lost to Joe Biden.
That's Reuters' Freddie Joyner reporting. Authorities say at least 8 people died and others are unaccounted for after a pair of migrant smuggling boats flipped over near a San Diego beach. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn has more.
It's one of the worst boat smuggling accidents off the coast of California.
We've lost 8 souls.
San Diego lifeguard chief James Gartland on KGTV says they spent the early morning hours Sunday searching for possible survivors after receiving a 911 call from a woman who said that her boat had capsized along with a second vessel. When rescuers arrived, 8 were dead, some 15 others unaccounted for.
We did the best we could to recover people from the water, try and find survivors.
Coast Guard Captain James Spittler says smuggling enterprises lure these migrants into a dangerous trip.
These people are often labor trafficked and sex trafficked when they arrive.
I'm Jackie Quinn.
China has reappointed Yi Gang as head of the central bank to reassure entrepreneurs and financial markets by showing continuity at the top while other economic officials change. Yi, whose official title is governor of the People's Bank of China, plays no role in making monetary policy. Unlike his counterparts in other major economies, his official role is implementing monetary policy or carrying out decisions made by a policymaking body whose membership is a secret. But the central bank governor is the most prominent Chinese figure in global finance at a time when China's economy is emerging from drastically slower growth. And a suspension of diplomatic ties between Nicaragua and the Vatican has been proposed. This, according to Nicaragua's foreign ministry on Sunday. This is following reports that it had moved toward breaking relations with the Holy See. From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Ukraine's future hinges on the outcome of fighting with Russia in and around Bakhmut, President Volodymyr Zelensky said, with both sides describing relentless battles as Moscow intensifies a winter campaign to capture the small eastern city. Bakhmut has become the focus of Russia's assault, with months of bloody infantry battles inflicting heavy losses on both sides. Zelensky said in video address late Monday, Ukraine's future depends on the outcome, as well as other war-torn areas in the country's eastern Donetsk region. U.S. President Joe Biden's administration has announced an extension for Ukrainians who fled to the U.S. after Russia invaded their homeland. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
Thousands of Ukrainians are in the U.S. under a special one-year authorization that's set to expire, but the Biden administration's allowing them to stay longer under a humanitarian parole. After the initial group, the U.S. started a longer program of 2 years called Uniting for Ukraine. Homeland Security says this extension is for Ukrainian nationals led into the U.S. before that program began. I'm Jackie Quinn.
U.S. President Joe Biden and the leaders of Australia and Britain have announced Australia will buy nuclear-powered attack submarines from the U.S. to modernize its fleet. The agreement comes as concerns grow about China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region.
This first project is only beginning. More partnerships, more potential, more peace and security in the region lies ahead. Simply stated, we're putting ourselves in the strongest possible position to navigate the challenges of today and tomorrow together.
Biden stressed the submarines will not have nuclear weapons. This is VOA News. Financial stocks around the world plunged on Monday, even as U.S. President Joe Biden vowed to take whatever action was needed to ensure the safety of the country's banking system after 2 banks collapsed in 3 days. Reuters correspondent Zachary Goldman reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday sought to reassure Americans that the sudden collapse of 2 banks, including the largest bank failure since the 2008 financial crisis, did not threaten their savings.
We will not stop at this. We'll do whatever is needed.
The morning address came after a weekend of emergency moves by U.S. regulators to guarantee all deposits at Silicon Valley Bank, which failed on Friday, and at Signature Bank, which was taken over by regulators on Sunday.
Reuters correspondent Zachary Goldman. Australia's most iconic building, the Sydney Opera House, is celebrating its 50th anniversary, the AP's Ed Donahue reports.
It was opened in 1973 by Queen Elizabeth.
It gives me great pleasure to declare open the Sydney Opera House.
Perched on the edge of Sydney Harbour, it's a building that's become an iconic part of the city skyline. Programming director Fiona Winning says a lot has happened in those 50 years.
118,000 at last count performances have happened in the Opera House, and 63 million seats have been sold.
Close to 11 million people visit the Sydney Opera House every year. I'm Ed Donahue.
American Olympic high jumper Dick Fosbury has died, a man known for changing the track and field sport. The AP's Lisa Dwyer has more.
Before Fosbury, high jumpers cleared their heights by running parallel to the bar, then leaping over it with a scissors kick. At the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, Fosbury used his new technique to set an Olympic record and win gold. Fosbury took off at an angle, leaped backward, and bent himself into a J shape to catapult his 6'4" frame over the bar. By the next Olympics, 28 of the 40 jumpers were using the Fosbury flop. Today, it is by far the most used technique for elite high jumpers. Fosbury's publicist said that the famous jumper died after a reoccurrence with lymphoma. He was 76. I'm Lisa Dwyer.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's political allies are pressing ahead with their plan to overhaul the judiciary. The coalition advanced a bill Monday that would protect the long-serving leader from calls he be removed from office over corruption charges he faces. The government has pledged to plow ahead with the legal changes despite widespread operation. The steps are the latest in a series of legislation seen by critics as concentrating power in the governing coalition's hands. They say the measures will erode Israel's systems of checks and balances and undermine democracy. I'm Joe Ramsey. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The U.S. military said a Russian fighter jet on Tuesday struck the propeller of a U.S. drone over the Black Sea, causing American forces to bring down the U.S. drone.
This MQ-9 was operating in international airspace over international waters and posed a threat to nobody. It was an unsafe and unprofessional intercept.
White House National Security spokesman John Kirby, he added U.S. State Department officials would be speaking directly with their Russian counterparts. State Department spokesman Ned Price called it a brazen violation of international law. Ukraine's top military command is unanimously in favor of defending the sector of eastern Ukraine, including the besieged city of Bakhmut, and inflicting maximum losses on the enemy, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Tuesday. He said the main focus was on Bakhmut. Zelensky, in his nightly video address, quote, "There was a clear position of the entire command, strengthen the sector and destroy the occupiers to the maximum." Zelensky also spoke about his conversation with Rupert Murdoch, chairman of News Corp and Fox Corporation, on the anniversary of the deaths of two Fox News journalists in the Kyiv region while they were reporting on the conflict. The death toll in Malawi from Cyclone Freddy passed 200 on Tuesday after the record-breaking storm triggered floods and landslides in its second strike on Africa in less than 3 weeks. After brewing off Australia in early February, Freddy traversed the Indian Ocean and made landfall on southeastern Africa in late February before returning over the weekend to deliver a second punch. This is VOA News. A surprise government shakeup by South Sudan's president this month has raised new concerns about the country's stability. Sheila Pony reports from Juba.
President Salva Kiir made changes to the cabinet just over a week ago, but for Riek Machar, Kiir's political rival and now his vice president, Kiir's firing of Defense Minister Angelina Tenge was a violation of the 2018 peace deal that ended South Sudan's civil war. Tenge is also Machar's wife. Civil activists are now urging Kiir and Machar to put aside their differences and work together to achieve peace. Sheila Pony, VOA News, Juba, South Sudan.
Tons of garbage is piling up along the streets of Paris as sanitation workers strike for a ninth day. AP correspondent Karen Chalmers reports.
The creeping squalor is the most visible sign of widespread anger over a bill to raise the French retirement age by 2 years. Tourist Nadia Turkey says the smell and sight definitely affected her visit for the worse, but she sees the reason behind the mess.
Of course, it is an unpleasant experience, less for us, for tourists and for the locals. But if it does the job, then why not?
Strikes in France have intermittently hobbled other sectors, including transport, energy and ports. But French President Emmanuel Macron remains undaunted. I'm Karen Chamas.
A class action lawsuit has been filed against the parent company of Silicon Valley Bank, its CEO, and its chief financial officer. AP correspondent Mike Hempen reports.
The lawsuit claims Silicon Valley Bank, its CEO Greg Becker, and its chief financial officer Daniel Beck did not disclose the risks that future interest rate increases would have on its business. The lawsuit was filed by shareholders and seeks unspecified damages to be awarded to those who invested in SVB between June of 2021 and last Friday. The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank has shaken the technology industry and worried small businesses and individuals with deposits at the bank. I'm Mike Hempen.
The 2026 World Cup will have 104 matches instead of the traditional 64 games due to the expanded format, with 48 teams taking part. Global soccer governing body FIFA said on Tuesday ahead of its Congress in Kigali, Rwanda. The 2026 edition, which will be co-hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, will be the first edition of the quadrennial tournament where 48 teams are taking part. The final will be held on July 19th, 2026. Find more at voanews.com. I'm Joe Ramsey.